Hey, what's going on? It's your boy, your man, Sazzo. Not your boy, your brother, Sazzo. And I'm just here, definitely reacting again to this video. Black rednecks, white liberals. Um, uh, continuing the conversation. Try to address some of the talking points that was laid out on the Lapeef network about Frank Zona stating that African Americans have no culture. All right. So this video here, which they did a pretty great job of, um, you know, delivering Thomas Sowell's point of his book, Black Rednecks, White Liberals, explaining actually the history of the culture of where African Americans culturally come from. All right. And then this video does a great breakdown. So I hope you can take this into consideration when you're considering addressing the matter. All right. So without no further ado, let's get into it.
So, what if some of the most persistent, most painful social patterns in America didn't actually start where we think they did? Today, we're going to unpack the really controversial thesis from Thomas Sowell's book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Now, this is a challenging idea, for sure, and it's been debated for years. Let's be clear, our job here is just to lay out the argument exactly as he presents it.
Right off the bat, the book opens with this quote. Sowell is basically signaling his whole game plan from page 1. He's saying, look, we're going to build a historical case based on what he presents as facts, even if those facts make us uncomfortable or challenge the stories we're used to hearing.
Okay. I'm always open to a challenge. That's what actually this is about, challenging the norms um, and addressing all controversial, non-controversial topics and so on and so forth. The conservative cipher.
So what is this big argument anyway? Well, at its heart, Sowell is taking a sledgehammer to a really common narrative about American history. He's offering a totally different explanation for where certain cultural behaviors came from. So let's look at the two views he puts head to head.
Okay, this is the core of it. On one hand, you have the common view that certain social patterns are a direct result, a legacy of slavery.
That's what's constantly, put forward, that we are who we are because of slavery, how we act because of slavery. But Thomas Sowell says different.
But Sewell's thesis, it's a radical departure. He argues that these same patterns were actually absorbed from a very specific white Southern culture that was around long before it ever came into contact with enslaved Africans.
Now, Sowell gets it. He admits that the legacy of slavery idea sounds plausible, right? It seems to make sense on the surface. But then he says, hold on a second, because when you really dig into the history, that whole explanation starts to fall apart.
You gotta think about that. Why would it fall apart? For my personal perspective is, once you come out of slavery, right, and you're not acting like the way of the place that you come from. Like, people came out of slavery completely different than actual people in West Africa or sub-Saharan Africa.
So if the origin isn't slavery, then where on earth does he trace it back to? Well, his argument takes us on a journey all the way across the Atlantic to a very particular part of Great Britain.
And the key thing to get here is how specific he is. He's not talking about all of British culture. Nope. He pinpoints the origin to what he calls the Celtic fringe, those historically chaotic, violent border regions of Scotland.
Makes sense. I mean, let's see where he goes.
Wales and Northern Ireland. So Will then identifies this whole cluster of cultural traits. You've got things like an aversion to steady work, a real neglect of education, and this touchy pride that could just explode into violence at a moment's notice.
I mean, who does that sound like? Aversion to work, meaning like you don't want to work. Proneness to violence, a lot of violence comes out of the community right now. It's like everybody's running around on demon time. Everybody know who body who you know my body. You know what I mean? Everybody, everything is referred to as I'm always on go. I'm trained to go. I'm ready to give it up. I'm ready to get violent. Neglection of education. I mean, education. Joel Santana said kids don't have to read or something like that. I ain't gonna say that was a direct quote, but it was something similar. Sexual promiscuity. Sexual promiscuity. What is that? You know exactly what that is. That's prominent culture right now. Like women don't even wear clothes anymore. Everything they wear is like wrestling suits, like skin tight, very revealing. Marriage out the window, sexual freedom, you know, improvidence and drunkenness. Everybody getting twisted. Everybody get drunk. Touchy pride. Everybody's prideful right now. You can't say nothing to nobody, and it's not gonna pop off. Like, what he say? What he say? What you talking about? That's who said that, Mama? You talk about me? Low self-esteem. You know, everybody's so worried about what people have to say about them. You know, boastful self-dramatization, always boastful, always talking about yourself, self-centered, you know, and not even accomplished, but you got broke people acting like they rich.
He argues that back in those lawless borderlands, these traits were maybe even survival skills. But when you transplant that culture to a more stable modern society, those same traits become incredibly destructive. And this quote right here is a perfect example of that touchy pride he's talking about. It's that idea of being disrespected or dissed and responding with this overwhelming life or death violence.
I will come with men and 20 rifles, and I'll have your life or you shall have mine. That's I mean, like, I'm coming, I'm spinning the block. I'm popping off. I'm coming. You said something about me, you try to diss me, you try to play me, I'm pulling up. And I'm bringing all my goons, and we're ready to crash out.
Sowell claims this was a central feature of this culture. Okay, so you might be wondering, how does a culture like this travel all the way from the British borderlands to modern Americans?
So we already got the culture now. We got the traits, the characteristics of the culture. Now, how did it get from where it was originated to America?
Cities. Well, Sowell lays out a very clear path, like a chain of transmission. He argues it was this four-step journey. First, it starts with white immigrants who settle the American South. Then, over generations, it gets absorbed by the Southern blacks living right there alongside them. And finally, during the Great Migration, it's carried north into urban.
You see? It started in Britain, right? Wales, Ireland, the Celtics. What sign is this? You already know, Boston. It originated that part of town, right? Then it came to the American South, where black people were predominantly at during slavery. The plantations, most of them was in the South, right? Then those slave owners, not only the slave owners, but because everybody didn't own slaves, but the neighbors, the people who they came in contact with, the slaves who they came in contact with, the poor, even the poor people, mainly the poor whites who lived in the South, came in contact with the Southern black people, and then they became, the black Southerners absorbed this Southern culture, and then they took that culture with them to the North. And this became the creation of urban ghettos. Urban ghettos carried north during the Great Migration to urban centers. Once actually after slavery was abolished, people were free black people. Then they started to migrate from the South and go west, go north.
Centers. It's really a theory of cultural contagion, spreading across time and space.
And here's where it gets wild. Sowell says the evidence isn't just behavioral. You can hear it in the language. He makes this pretty startling claim that a lot of what we call Black English, like saying ax instead of ask, isn't from Africa at all. He says it's actually an old speech pattern from those specific regions of Britain.
I mean, that's pretty much clear as day. That's clear as day. Because the African English, it's not like American English, especially in the urban communities. Even in the urban communities in Africa, if they're not speaking their own dialect, or if they're not speaking a foreign language, if they choose to speak English, it doesn't sound like American English. They don't say, let me ask my mom and see if she could, you know what I mean, if I could come outside. Or, yo, this dude try to diss me on some nonsense. He try to play me. They don't talk like that.
Basically preserved like a fossil in modern language.
And that brings us to that really provocative term from the title.
Black rednecks.
When Sowell says black rednecks, he's not just using a slur. It's his specific technical term for this idea. The thesis that this white Southern redneck culture was absorbed by and then preserved within a part of the black population.
Now, to back up this idea that this was a real, distinct, and pretty counterproductive culture among whites in the South, Sowell points to data like this from before the Civil War. I mean, look at that illiteracy rate.
Okay, so do you see it? All right, illiteracy rate in the South was over 20% of black people in the South were illiterate, couldn't read, where compared to the North, where this culture wasn't in abundance as of yet, because it eventually grew, it eventually took over, and it's here now. It's very much so dominant. Compared to 1% in the North, New England, New York, Rhode Island, compared to the South, South Carolina, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, Florida. Now, yeah, so that was the difference. Patents issued. Look at the difference between patents. Only 8% of patents was issued in the South compared to 92% being issued in the North.
Over 20% in the white South compared to less than 1% in New England. He uses this to argue that there was already this massive cultural gap in attitudes towards things like education and work.
All right, so that's the historical part of the argument. But then, the thesis takes this massive leap right into the modern era. Sowell asks a really important question. If this culture is so old and so damaging, why does it still exist? And this is where his argument takes its second and maybe even more controversial turn.
70%. This number is huge. That's the percentage of black children born to unmarried women in 1994. What's absolutely stunning, though, is that back in 1960, that number was only 22%.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? What is it? 60, that like 30 years. 60 to 90, in 30 years, it went from 70%. I mean, it went from 20% out of wedlock to 70%. That's crazy. That's crazy. And if things don't change, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. So up 1994, 70% of African-American children were born out of wedlock compared to just 1960, where it was only 20%. This behavior is new. This is real. They can talk about, you can say black culture is trash, which I've heard, but black culture is not really black culture. It's not. You can say black women are don't know how to act and out of control, but you can't just say black women. It's a combination of both men and women. Is a combination of letting go of our conservative values, conservative values being pushed out of the circulation by these liberals. And it's completely destructive to us. It's destroyed us as black people all over the world. Not just America. It's not just America. It's all over the world.
Sowell looks at that dramatic change in just one generation and says, something happened here, and we need to explain it.
For Sowell, the timing is everything. He says this massive shift didn't happen right after slavery.
It happened a whole century later. And he argues it lines up almost perfectly with the huge expansion of the welfare state in the 1960s, which, in his view, made the single-parent family economically possible on a mass scale for the very first time. And this is where this
Correct. Incentivizing bad behavior. Incentivizing single parent homes. You know, when the welfare agent come through the house and look all through your house, make sure you ain't got no man in the house. Like, those things didn't happen.
second part of the title comes in: white liberals. Sowell's argument here is that modern liberal ideology, by focusing only on external things like racism and poverty, has effectively provided alibis and shut down any talk about internal cultural patterns that might be causing problems. So, he says this older culture is basically kept on life support by a three-part mechanism. First, the welfare state makes self-destructive lifestyles economically survivable. Second, he claims that intellectuals and academics praise these same patterns as some kind of authentic racial identity. And finally, if anyone tries to critique these cultural patterns, they're immediately shut down with the charge of blaming the victim, which makes any real conversation impossible.
That's so correct. So they pay you not to work. They pay you to have out of wedlock children, right? Because if you are single and you having kids, and you don't have a job, you're not working, they're gonna pay you welfare, and other kind of social benefits. And another thing is, you can't have any. There's no criticism that can be, that can be had. You can't criticize, or you can't say anything about the whole process, because they're gonna say you are a white supremacist. You're a coon. You know what I mean? Like, for you to say something like, "Nah, this situation ain't right," well, or what you believe is wrong, or you're a white supremacist talking white supremacist points, and that's a system. Like, you can't even criticize the system, and with and if you criticize, you risk hurting somebody's pride, and then what happens when you hurt somebody's pride is immediately goes to violence, because that is the culture. I don't know what people don't understand.
So, given how incendiary all of this is, you got to ask, what's the point? Why make such a challenging and, to many, offensive argument? What's the goal? Well, in the book's preface, Sowell is really clear about this. He says he's not here to offer a 5-point plan or a political solution. His stated goal is just to add a different historical understanding to force us to re-examine the stories we tell ourselves by looking at history from a completely different angle.
Correct. We have to just look inside, and self-assess. Sometimes it's not about providing a solution. It's just providing clarity so you can come to your own conclusion and find your own solution. But here's the information. It's up to you to take it or leave it.
He pulls out this quote from the philosopher Eric Hoffer to make a much bigger point about just human nature. The idea is that an alibi, an external reason for why we're struggling, can feel a lot better, a lot more comforting than the tough, messy work of actual achievement.
Wow.
And this is really the bottom line of the whole argument. From his point of view, focusing on external blame and offering what he calls alibis, no matter how good the intentions are, is ultimately a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
He argues the only thing that brings real respect, including self-respect, is achievement.
Exactly that. There's always a blame, an insult being tossed around. Well, our struggle is different and unique. That's why we're still here struggling. Instead of thinking about achieving these goals, turning the situation around now, ban abortion now, today, done with it. Zero, can't happen. Ban it. Mandatory education. You have to go to school. Truancy is a problem.
And that means you have to confront any internal cultural roadblocks that are standing in the way. And so, whether you completely agree with this thesis or you're completely rejected, it leaves us with this really powerful question. It forces us to think about how the stories we tell about the past, the historical narratives we choose to believe, profoundly shape how we see the problems of today and what we think we can or can't do about them.
Exactly that. Things can change for the better. Because right now it's looking like it's going in a horrible, terrible direction. And if we keep up this culture of doing things, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. Mark my words. So, here's the here's the history. I would say the truth. Thomas Sowell is well-respected economist. So, what more can I say? Like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you agree, leave a comment. We could talk about it. If not, catch you on the next time. Peace out.